The Honourable Christopher Finlayson.
Mr Speaker, I too extend a very warm welcome to the representatives of Raukawa who have joined us today for this occasion. They may be wondering why I, as the Minister in charge of the bill, was not here for the first speech. The reason for that is quite simple. Mrs Turia is the local MP, and she asked me if she could give the first speech because of her fondness for Ngāti Raukawa. When Mrs Turia asks someone to do something, you do it. And the reason is she's, quite apart from the fact that she's the local MP, I have to confess she's my favourite politician, utterly principled, very decent woman. In this place, folk say it takes a lot of courage to stand up to one's enemies. Well, it takes a lot more courage to stand up to one's friends, and that's what Mrs Turia did 10 years ago, and she won. I just wish that she forgot about retirement and decided to follow Mrs Thatcher's dictum to go on and on and on. So that's why she gave the first speech. But I acknowledge that it takes skill and courage to reach a settlement. The Raukawa negotiating team have navigated this very tricky river with pragmatism, with leadership and diligence, and it's because of these dedicated people that we're here today, and I certainly want to pay tribute to them. And I acknowledge past and present negotiators, Chris McKenzie, Vanessa Epiraima, Nigel Tahiko, Patricia Carley. I think Stephanie O'Sullivan, David Bennett has just said to me, is not here today, but she's watching it on television. And I wish her all the very best. She's done great work for Ngāti Raukawa. I first met her when we were still in opposition in about 2006 with Chris and Hamilton, and I know how much she means to the iwi and how much the iwi means to her. But I particularly want to say a few words about George Rangatutia, who has passed away, who championed Raukawa with wisdom, with humility and leadership. I've many memories of George the quiet leader, George who just settled things down at that airing of grievances in Tokoroa some years ago. George the very kind host who picked me up at the top of the Kaimais one beautiful summer's morning in January in the bus, and with members of Raukawa we drove around the Rohe, and he dropped me off near Taupo because I was heading off to be shown the Wanganui River by Archie Tairoa the next day. And the sad thing is both those fine people, and they're both gone. So I always remember George as a kind host on that beautiful day. And George the ill but optimistic patient. And I was very pleased with Louise Upston to go and visit him the day we signed the deed of settlement, and we got his signature on the deed, and that was a very special occasion for me. And I want to thank Denise Roach for her very kind words. I was frankly in a state of shock because it's the first time a Green member's ever said anything nice about me. In fact, I was so shocked. Judith Collins was, speaking of enemies, I hear Mr Mallard piping up, but Judith Collins was so surprised she called me over for counselling and wondered if something had gone wrong. But anyway, I want to thank Denise, and I will treasure that memory. So I want to acknowledge all these people because they've played their part, but I particularly want to place on record my deep respect and affection for George, and wish his family all the very best on this special day. Mr Speaker, Raukawa are no strangers to this House. In 2008, they were here as a party to the Central North Island Forests Land Collective Settlement legislation. In 2010, they joined us here along with their neighbours, Ngāti Tuwharetoa and Te Arawa, to witness and celebrate the passage of the Ngāti Tuwharetoa Raukawa and Te Arawa River Iwi Waikato River Act 2010. And the aim of that legislation, as you yourself know, not that I'm bringing you into the debate, but simply in passing, as the MP for Waikato, you know that it is to restore and protect the health and well-being of the great river that flows through your electorate. Raukawa are again our guests today, this time for the final steps to their settlement journey. It does address the long-standing historical grievances of Raukawa, which, as many in this House have said, and I particularly thank Mr Tirakatni for his contribution, these matters are long overdue for settlement, because what happened up there was simply unjust. And I do recall so very well the airing of grievances in Tokoroa when the elderly lady stood up and she said that she was forced out of her home and she resisted going until the waters were just about lapping at the entrance because of Public Works Act takings and hydroelectric development in that part of the country. And these unjust actions, they started in the 19th century, continued right through to the mid-20th century, and what they did resulted in the economic, social and cultural impoverishment of Raukawa and their special relationship with their lands and waterways. And they're not formulaic statements, they're statements from the heart, particularly as a result of having got to know these people and the utterly justifiable claims that they've had over such a lengthy period. These grievances started with the wars of the 1860s in the Waikato, where the loss of life and property through armed conflict, through occupation, through ropatu, had such a severe impact on the well-being of Raukawa. And picking up what Mr Tirakatni said and coming back to that day in Tokoroa, I too recall the statements about Mangakino and the Poakani lands and so on, and the utter unfairness of that. Unfairness which repeats itself year in and year out, and I know has been, what's to call it an irritation, minimises it, a severe question for Raukawa over the years. Mind you, it wasn't very fair to Ngāti Kahu ki Wairarapa either, Kahanunu ki Wairarapa either, and of course they were given that land because I think people thought it was worthless, and then after the Second World War it proved it was economically viable. But what happened there was simply unfair, unbecoming of the Crown, and that is why we have these settlements, and that is why, as others have said, it's important to know the history of what happened. So the Crown acknowledges it's breached the Treaty of Waitangi and its principles in its relationship with Raukawa. It failed to protect the mana and the rangatiratanga of Raukawa. It failed to protect Raukawa interests in customary resources and significant sites. And that is why we've had a settlement. That is why this legislation is introduced. And that is why I'm so very keen to see the legislation move through the House as quickly as possible so that it can be legislated for before the end of the year. And last week I was talking to Vanessa, who was a little bit upset that perhaps it wasn't debated last week, and I said, oh, watch the space. We've managed to get it done quicker than either of us thought, and I'm just so very pleased that now it will be off to the Māori Affairs Select Committee, led by the great Mr Henare and his team, that are going to be very busy because they're dealing with the Tito Ihu Claims Settlement Bill, 8 settlements there, and the Haka, the Tokotoro legislation, 3 settlements there, the Tamaki Collective Settlement Bill, the Mongaharuru Tangitu Settlement Bill, and now this bill. So I say this simply to the members of that committee and to Mr Henare in particular, there's no time to muck around. You've got to knuckle down, get these bills through the system and get them back to the House as quickly as possible. Of course he's listening because he's an outstanding chair of the Maori. The member's listening, isn't he? He's an outstanding chair of the Maori Affairs Select Committee. He's a great friend and colleague, and I know that he's going to get these bills back post-haste.
Members, this debate has concluded. The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it.
Raukawa Claim Settlement Bill, first reading.
The question is that the Raukawa Claims Settlement Bill be considered by the Maori Affairs Committee. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Call on Government Order of the Day number 6.
Subordinate Legislation Confirmation and Validation Bill number 2, first reading.
The Honourable Chris Tremaine.
I move that the support